Mary had always been the type of person who believed in the mundane, the ordinary. She had never given much thought to the strange occurrences that some of her friends had whispered about. Ghosts, spirits, or anything supernatural were simply tales designed to entertain or frighten. She had lived in her small apartment for over 2 years now, and in all that time, nothing had ever seemed out of the ordinary. It was a cozy, quiet place tucked away on the second floor of an old, yet well-kept building. The kind of apartment where the walls seemed to hold whispers of a long past, but offered no threat, just history. On that particular evening, the air outside was damp, the smell of rain clinging to the pavement below. Mary had just finished her evening routine of cooking a quick dinner and washing the dishes. As usual, she felt a sense of contentment in the silence of her apartment. It was peaceful, like a gentle cocoon wrapping around her after a long day. She hummed to herself as she scrubbed the last plate, its smooth ceramic surface gleaming under the warm kitchen light. She slipped the ring from her finger, as she often did when she washed the dishes. It was a small, delicate piece of jewelry that had belonged to her grandmother. The silver band was simple, but the tiny sapphire in its center was a striking blue, a color that always reminded her of the summer skies they had shared as children. She always took the ring off when she was near water, out of fear of losing it, though it had never happened before. She placed it down on the counter beside the sink, a habit ingrained into her routine. But tonight, in that moment, things went wrong. As she moved her hand to wash the last dish, her elbow knocked against the counter. The ring slid from its resting place, catching just enough of the edge of the sink to send it tumbling downward. Her heart skipped a beat as she heard the faint clink of metal against porcelain, followed by the sound of it dropping into the drain with a soft, hollow thud. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as she leaned forward, staring into the drain. Her fingers trembled as she tried to steady herself, her breath caught in her throat. She had been so careful, always careful, never to let it slip away. But now, it was gone. She could hear the faint trickle of water moving through the pipes beneath, as though mocking her loss. Panic fluttered in her chest as she fumbled with the sink's stopper, trying to block the flow of water, hoping to retrieve the ring before it was lost for good. Her hands shook as she peered down the drain, wishing for a miracle. The tiny silver band had to be down there somewhere, just out of reach. She could almost imagine it, wedged deep in the labyrinth of pipes below. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders sagging in defeat. It wasn't the most valuable thing in the world, but it was precious to her, a tangible connection to her grandmother. She couldn't bear the thought of losing it forever. She ran her fingers through her hair, glancing around the kitchen for any tools that might help her retrieve the ring. That's when her gaze fell on the garbage disposal. A thought, almost as dark as the space itself, flickered through her mind. Could the ring have slipped into the disposal? Could it have made its way down, deeper into the system? The thought of putting her hand anywhere near that spinning blade made her stomach turn. But she had no choice. She would have to check. She turned off the water and nervously flicked the switch to turn off the disposal, hoping the metal teeth had not done any damage to the ring. The kitchen seemed unnaturally quiet in those few moments before she reached down, feeling the cold, hard metal of the disposal under her fingers. She swallowed hard, bracing herself for the worst. Slowly, she crouched down and leaned over the sink, staring at the dark abyss beneath her. At first, there was nothing, just the shadowy, hollow space within the drain. Her fingers grazed the rim, the cool, smooth surface sending a shiver up her spine. She almost expected the ring to be there, waiting for her. But it was not. Yet, as she focused more on the blackness, she began to notice something unusual, something wrong. There, deep within the drain, she thought she saw a faint, glimmering reflection. A light flickered back at her from the abyss. But it wasn't the gleam of the ring. No, it was something far more unsettling. It was the distinct shape of a pupil, an eye staring up at her from the depths. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded in her chest, thumping wildly as she froze, unable to tear her gaze away from the sight. The eye was motionless, too still for comfort. It was unnaturally large, too large for what should have been visible down the drain. Its iris was dark, almost black, and its gaze was unblinking, unrelenting. The eyes stared straight back at her, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. She wanted to scream, wanted to pull away from the sink, but her body refused to obey. Her eyes locked with that inhuman gaze, her body rooted to the spot. There was no rational explanation, no logical reasoning for why this was happening. But the longer she stared, the more a cold, creeping dread settled into her bones. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. The darkness of the drain seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. The eye, it wasn't just looking at her, it was watching her, judging her. Her skin crawled, her muscles tensing as she felt the weight of its unseen presence pressing in on her from every angle. Her hand slowly, cautiously, reached for the faucet. She needed to turn on the water again. She needed to wash away the fear, the sight, the unsettling reality of the moment. But as her hand brushed the faucet, something else happened. A whisper. It wasn't a voice she could recognize. It wasn't a sound that came from the air around her. It was a soft, sinister murmur, almost like a breath. It seemed to come from deep within the drain, from the dark space beneath her sink. "I see you too." Her blood ran cold. The whisper was chilling, like ice against her skin. The words were not a reassurance, not a comfort. They were a warning, a declaration. The eye below her was more than just a reflection. It was something alive, something waiting. And now, it knew she was there. It knew who she was. It knew she had been foolish enough to look. Her hand recoiled from the faucet as if struck by an unseen force. She stumbled backward, almost falling to the floor as her mind raced. The voice, the eye, they couldn't be real. But there it was, staring up at her, unwavering and unblinking, locked in a gaze that seemed to pierce her soul. She wanted to run, to escape, but her legs felt as though they were made of stone, immovable and heavy. Her breath came in shallow gasps, panic rising in her throat, tightening her chest. She needed to leave, to get away from the drain, from the eye, from whatever was below. But the pull was strong, like gravity itself was keeping her there. Her mind screamed for her to look away, to stop gazing into the void, but her eyes refused to tear away. "I see you too." The whisper repeated itself, this time louder, sharper, more insistent. It was almost a hiss, the sound curling up from the drain like something alive, something ancient. A sickening realization washed over her. The eye wasn't just watching her, it was aware of her. It had always been aware of her. Without warning, the drain began to rumble. The water below her started to churn, as if something was stirring, something large, something alive. The sound grew louder, more insistent, as the very pipes beneath the sink began to shake. The walls of the kitchen seemed to pulse with a strange, otherworldly energy. The air grew thick with a sense of dread, and her pulse raced as she finally tore her gaze away from the eye. But when she tried to stand, her feet wouldn't move. Something was pulling her in. Something was dragging her down. The whisper was no longer a faint murmur. It was all-encompassing, filling her mind, drowning out everything else. The drain was alive, and it was hungry, and it had seen her. Her vision blurred as her body was pulled closer to the sink. Her last coherent thought before the darkness took over was of the ring she had so carelessly dropped. It was lost now, deep below, far beyond her reach. But whatever lay in the drain, whatever had been watching her, had found her, and it wasn't letting go. Mary's pulse raced, her entire body locked in place, as the chilling whisper continued to reverberate in her mind. The air around her seemed to thicken, like something unseen was pressing in from all sides. She could hear the rumbling in the pipes grow louder now, a constant, unsettling hum beneath the floorboards. The eye, still visible in the drain, seemed to shimmer, its unblinking gaze never wavering, almost as if it had become part of the very darkness itself. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her fingers gripping the edge of the sink, as if she were afraid it might pull her into the abyss below. She was frozen in place, unable to tear her eyes away from the unnatural eyes staring back at her. The voice had spoken once more, but this time it wasn't just a whisper. It had carried weight, like a thought that had been planted in her mind, resonating with an unsettling familiarity. She could feel it echoing deep within her, like an old memory trying to resurface, but she couldn't quite place it. She reached for the faucet, her hand trembling violently, her fingers numb. With a sudden, desperate motion, she turned the water on, hoping the sound of the rushing stream would break the spell that had locked her in place. The faucet's cold metal was slick under her touch, and the water flowed into the sink. But it didn't do what she expected. The water didn't drown out the whispering. It only seemed to amplify the sinister hum from below. The rumbling in the pipes intensified, becoming more rhythmic, like a heartbeat from deep within the walls. The eye didn't blink. The pulse beneath her feet continued, relentless and unnerving. She could feel it vibrating in her chest, the walls of the kitchen shaking slightly, as though something unseen was moving within the structure itself. Her breath hitched in her throat as she slowly, cautiously, stepped back. The room seemed to grow darker around her, the shadows creeping closer. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting brief, frantic flashes of light that only made the darkness feel even more oppressive. She took another step back. The rumbling didn't stop. Instead, it seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if it were coming closer. It was no longer just the sound of water rushing through the pipes. Now it felt like something was making its way toward her. She could almost feel the presence beneath the sink, feel it pushing against the space between them. The walls seemed to close in on her, the ceiling pressing down, as if the very house itself was alive and conspiring against her. She reached out with shaking hands and grabbed the edge of the counter, forcing herself to remain upright. Her head spun, dizziness threatening to overtake her. Her thoughts were a jumble of confusion and fear. What was that thing? That eye? That voice? What had it meant when it said it could see her too? Another rumble shook the floor, and Mary's knees nearly buckled beneath her. She could feel it now, a deep, bone-rattling vibration that seemed to emanate from the drain itself. Her eyes darted back to the sink, and for a split second, she thought she saw the eye shift. But it wasn't just an optical illusion. The pupil had moved ever so slightly, as though it were following her. She turned toward the door, her hand already reaching for the handle. She needed to leave. She needed to get out of that apartment, out of that kitchen. But before she could even grasp the doorknob, a new sound cut through the air, sharp and jarring. It was a knock, a low, resonant thunk that seemed to come from directly beneath her, deep within the floorboards. It was a sound like a heavy fist pounding against the walls, but it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the drain. Her breath caught in her throat as the knock echoed through her bones. And then there was silence. Just as suddenly as it had come, the noise stopped. The only sound was the faint trickle of water running from the faucet, and then a soft, almost imperceptible creak from the pipes below her. She turned slowly, fear slowly creeping back up her spine. She knew deep down that she couldn't leave. Something was keeping her here, tethering her to the drain, to the eye, to the presence lurking in the shadows of the pipes. Her heart raced, her mind spinning. What had she felt earlier? Was it real? Could something really be watching her from inside the drain? Without thinking, she moved back toward the sink. Her feet felt heavy, like she was walking through molasses, each step an agonizing struggle against the pull of whatever was waiting beneath her. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the apartment itself had become a trap. Her hands hovered near the sink again. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to turn away, but she couldn't. Her fingers brushed against the cold porcelain. The eye was still there. It hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't shown any sign of anything other than its unnerving stillness. She leaned closer, her breath shallow, trying to make sense of the impossible sight before her. The water in the sink swirled gently, moving in slow circles. For a moment, she thought it might be the sound of the pipes clearing, or the water settling after the chaos. But the movement in the sink wasn't normal. It wasn't the water flowing naturally, as it should have. No, it was like something was stirring beneath the surface, as though something alive was churning in the depths of the pipes. And then the whisper returned, louder now, clearer. "I see you too." The words crawled up her spine like icy fingers, and she gasped, recoiling from the sink, as if the words themselves had physically struck her. Her mind raced, 1,000 thoughts flooding her in an instant, but the one thought that stuck with her, that clung to her like a dark cloud, was the knowledge that the voice wasn't just in her mind. It was coming from the drain, from the dark, wet, silent depths. A chill ran down her spine, but she couldn't pull herself away. She couldn't tear her gaze from the sink. She wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but her body felt paralyzed, as though the very air in the room had conspired to hold her in place. And then the rumbling started again. This time it was louder, more forceful. The pipes under the sink groaned, shaking the walls, rattling the floor. The tremor in the air was undeniable, almost physical, like something heavy and ancient was stirring deep within the building. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat like the warning of an oncoming storm. And then she saw it. The eye moved. At first, it was barely perceptible, a slight twitch in the iris, as though it was adjusting to the light. But then, it was more than that. The eye began to widen, and as it did, the water in the sink swirled faster, like a whirlpool pulling her in. The darkness beneath the sink seemed to expand, pulling the light around it into its depths. The eye glowed now, an unnatural, sickly yellow that pierced the darkness. It was as if the very air around the sink had become alive with the presence of the thing beneath. Mary staggered backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like they were made of stone, unable to move, frozen by the growing presence that seemed to swell from the drain. A sudden, deafening crash from below broke the stillness. The pipes beneath the sink rattled violently, sending tremors through the floor. She fell backward, her legs giving out beneath her, and hit the floor with a loud thud. Her head spun, but she could not tear her eyes away from the sink. Something was coming. Something was reaching up from below. The room spun around her as Mary hit the cold floor, her limbs trembling from the overwhelming terror that threatened to consume her. She could feel the vibrations from the pipes beneath her, a deep, bone-rattling hum that seemed to crawl under her skin. The rumbling in the walls grew louder, more insistent, as though the house itself was alive and angry. Mary's breath came in short, panicked gasps. Her body felt paralyzed, trapped by an unseen force that pushed against her every movement. She wanted to run. She needed to run. But the terror was too great, a suffocating weight that pinned her in place. The darkness from the drain seemed to pulse, swallowing the light around it, stretching out like an ancient, hungry void. The eye, still there, still watching, was no longer still. It was moving, its iris flickering with unnatural energy, growing wider as if to take in the very essence of the room itself. The water in the sink churned, rising up around the edges of the drain, like something alive, something growing, something that had waited for this moment. The whispers had stopped, but Mary could still feel their presence, lingering in the air like a forgotten prayer, a curse that had been unleashed. And then the rumbling stopped for a moment. Everything was still. The house fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the faint sound of dripping water from the sink. Mary's mind raced, her heart thundering in her chest, her every instinct telling her to flee. But her eyes remained fixed on the drain, on the eye that still stared back at her. The silence stretched on, growing heavier, thicker. She could hear the pounding of her own heart, each beat a drum in her ears. The tension in the room seemed to build with each passing second, like the calm before a storm. Then, as if on cue, the drain began to glow. A faint, pulsing light emitted from deep within the pipes, a sickly yellow that illuminated the kitchen in a way that felt unnatural. The glow intensified and swirling like a vortex, pulling the shadows around it into its depths. The eye, if it could even be called an eye anymore, began to shift, its shape warping as though it were stretching, expanding. The light within the drain seemed to twist with the movement, growing brighter and more grotesque. Mary's stomach churned and she scrambled to her feet, her legs weak beneath her. She tried to turn away, to escape, but something kept her rooted in place. The pull of the drain was no longer a mere presence. It was tangible now, a force that wrapped around her body and mind, like an invisible hand squeezing the breath from her lungs. Suddenly the light exploded. It was blinding, a flash so bright that it seemed to consume everything around her, filling her vision with a searing white light. Mary shielded her eyes, falling backward against the floor as the intensity of the glow overwhelmed her senses. The room around her seemed to collapse into the light, as though the very walls of her apartment were dissolving into the brilliance. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the light disappeared. The kitchen was plunged into darkness once again, but the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer the quiet, oppressive dark she had come to fear. No, this was something different, something thick and suffocating. A presence lingered in the air, a weight pressing down on her, as though the very fabric of reality had shifted. She could feel it in the space between her breaths, in the air that now tasted heavy and bitter on her tongue. Her heart hammered in her chest, and for the first time, she dared to look down into the sink. The eye was gone, but the drain was no longer empty. Instead, it seemed to have opened into something far more sinister. The blackness beneath the sink had deepened, stretched into an endless void that swallowed everything around it. It was as though the drain had become a portal, a rift into something far darker than she could comprehend. The air around it shimmered like heat rising from a desert, but this was no heat. It was cold, freezing her to the core. Mary's pulse quickened, her feet suddenly moving before her mind could process. She turned, stumbling toward the door, the feeling of the drain's presence still clinging to her skin, wrapping around her limbs, pulling her back. She reached for the doorknob, her fingers slick with sweat, but as her hand grasped it, she froze. The doorknob didn't turn. It was as if the door itself had sealed her in, locking her into the nightmare that had taken over her home. She tugged at the knob again, her breath coming in panicked gasps, but it refused to budge. The room was too still now, too quiet. No more rumbling, no more whispering, just the hollow silence that filled the space between her and the dark. Then she heard it, a soft, scraping sound, a faint, unnatural noise that seemed to come from all around her. It was the sound of something moving, something slithering beneath the floor, beneath the walls. It was coming closer, and Mary could feel it, a crawling, creeping presence closing in on her from every direction. Her eyes darted toward the drain again, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something. A shadow, fleeting and quick, darting across the black void at the center of the sink. It was not human, not animal. It was something else, something alien, something born of the darkness that now ruled the room. The scraping sound grew louder, and her heart stopped. From within the sink, from deep within the dark, something began to emerge. It wasn't a hand, nor a claw, nor any recognizable form. It was a tendril of darkness, a writhing mass that seemed to reach for her, pulling itself up from the drain, like a creature from the depths of hell itself. It moved quickly, coiling around the edges of the sink, its shape indistinct, like smoke or ink in water. But its presence was undeniable. It was alive, and it was hungry. Mary backed away, her hands trembling as she tried to open the door once more, her fingers numb with fear. The door wouldn't give. The tendril stretched higher, reaching toward her, as if it could sense her, as if it had been waiting for her to try and escape. Her breath caught in her throat as the mass of darkness inched closer. The coldness emanating from it was freezing her skin, numbing her limbs, stealing her will to fight. She had to move, had to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The tendril reached her, coiling around her ankle like a serpent, its touch icy, suffocating. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the overwhelming presence in the room. The mass of darkness tightened its grip, pulling her closer, dragging her toward the sink. She kicked, struggling, but it was too strong, too quick. It was too late. As she was pulled toward the drain, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the darkened surface of the sink. But it wasn't her own face that stared back. No, it was something else, something wrong. Her reflection twisted, its features stretching and contorting, its eyes wide and hollow, staring at her with an empty gaze. And then Before she could scream again, the darkness swallowed her whole. The drain closed behind her, and the kitchen was still once more. The apartment was silent. The glow had faded. The air had cleared. But deep beneath the floor, beneath the very foundation of the building, something stirred. Something that had been waiting. Something that had been watching. And in the darkness, it waited for the next time someone would drop a ring down the drain.